All right. In this video for project-specific techniques, we're going to look at the 3D camera that's set in your Blender scene. So we're going to learn just a couple basic things about how to identify it, how to move it around, and how to use it to see through into your scene, but also adjust some of its basic properties. So let's take a look at that. So first off, let's find the elusive 3D camera. If you're looking in your scene currently, the camera is actually shown or visualized as a little triangular looking pyramid structure. And it's loaded with any scene in Blender by default. And this is the camera inside of the scene. So we understand it here. You can actually also select the camera from the outliner menu in the upper right. It's just called camera, and it has a kind of cinematic camera icon, little dual spool looking image. And this is what the camera looks like inside of Blender. Again, it's this little kind of pyramid looking structure. And here's how you can kind of understand it visually. Number one, it has this little solid triangle graphic that's visualized up above it. And that solid camera graphic solid triangle graphic is actually, it tells you which side of points up for the lens so that you understand which way to rotate it. So the triangle always points up if you want the lens to be in the right orientation. Also, you need to know that the side that triangle is on is also the front of the camera, so that represents where the lens is located on the pyramid, this big open box. So that's where it views through. The shape of that also dictates the shape of the render area, which is always rectangular. And you may notice, of course, that the widget on the 3D camera is at the back of the camera for adjusting its position in 3D space. We're going to mess with its transformations, but to understand how to do that, we're going to actually turn on a viewport for the 3D camera to be seen through while we're working in here. So to do that, we're going to actually use a shortcut key on our number pad on the keyboard. And the shortcut to turn on the camera view is 0. So use your number pad on the far right and go ahead and click on the 0 key. And when you hit 0, again, make sure your mouse is somewhere out in your viewports when you hit 0. You should have your viewport switch to this little cropped box in your user perspective window. If you accidentally hit the 0 on the top of your keyboard, like where your numbers are, and your other symbols on your regular short keyboard, that actually switches layers in Blender. And so if you hit 0 over there, this happens. And this immediately creates freak out amidst every student, and they don't know what to do. They're like, where did my scene go? Oh my gosh. All you've done is switch layers. If you hit 1 over along the top of your regular keyboard after you do that, it'll switch back to the layer you've actually been designing inside of Blender. But that's just in case you use that number pad across the regular keyboard. If you're on a laptop, by the way, that's the only number pad you probably have to switch to the camera. If you need to change that for any reason, you can go to your user preferences in Blender and go to Input and switch on this little checkbox that says Emulate Number Pad. And that's good for laptops only. If you don't have an extended keyboard or number pad USB device for your keyboard, for your laptop. But that's what that's for. If you're on a regular computer like we are in the lab with an extended keyboard, don't do that, okay? All right. So we can use 0 to turn on the camera. You can also hit 0 again to turn the camera off and just switch back to your normal view. So just be aware of that. Anytime you want to get out of the camera view, you just hit 0 again, and that'll flip back to your normal user perspective window. But let's leave the camera on. And what we're going to do is actually maneuver the camera in our other 2 viewports to change our view that we can see through the camera. So I'm going to move my camera around first to my top view. And notice that my camera perspective window changes actively as I move my camera around in my top view. And again, you do this with a coordinated effort. There are ways to tell the camera to lock onto a model or a particular object in the scene. I'm not going to really talk about that though until our next exercise. But this does give you an idea of how to manipulate the camera inside your scene to be able to get a better view on your object. And again, you can also use the rotation shortcut to rotate your camera in a specific viewport. To spin it around. And then you can also scroll your wheel in and out on the user perspective window if you want to zoom in on what the camera is actually seeing. So you can move your mouse over that window and then roll your mouse wheel in and out to zoom in and out on the camera view. But again, what you see inside the orange box dictates what the camera is actually seeing. Everything outside of it is cropped off. That's kind of dark shaded out here. But that's how we can manipulate the camera in the scene. Now, there are properties connected to the camera that you may want to adjust. So let's go look at our camera properties in the property window. So let's go to the property panel over on the right side. And you may already have the camera property turned on. Just make sure your camera is selected in your scene. And in properties, there should be a little dual spool cinematic camera icon that you can click on. And underneath that, there's only a couple settings that I'll recommend that you can tweak. I don't really want you to go too far past this. But the first section here is where we'll stick, called Lens. And this has a couple options you can tweak that I recommend. The first one is the default setting for the camera is on perspective, which gives us angular distortion when we see our image through the camera. It also gives us perspective distortion and a vanishing point. All of those are really great things if you're trying to simulate an actual live action scene from a camera. However, since we are not creating like a live action scene, but we're actually just trying to view a basic model structure or a sort of bust sculpture design, that can actually be a detracting and sort of negative use of the tool. So what I recommend is using the other option next to perspective in your camera property that says orthographic. So click on the word orthographic. When you switch to orthographic, it removes all of the angle distortion from your camera lens and allows you to see your model in more of a flat perspective kind of view, which is more accurate in terms of just viewing the model for what it is in 3D space. So once we've done that, again, you can move your camera around in the other viewports, but notice that if you try to push your camera towards your object, like from the top view, the zoom level does not change. It will not zoom in as you move an orthographic camera towards the model. It just stays the same size the whole time. And that's because, again, we removed perspective distortion. So distance doesn't matter for that. If we do want to zoom with the orthographic camera, we need to change it in the property window using orthographic scale. So there's a big slider over here that says orthographic scale, and you can click and drag on that to zoom in or zoom out on your scene.
It's hard for me to grab the camera. I keep grabbing the other item.
Use your outliner panel to select the camera.
Oh, okay.
So you can select it from there. You may want to use the widget that's over your camera to move it if you can't click inside the little white circle for your camera.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. But sometimes you can use the little widget arrows to help move it around in each of the views. But yeah, when it's clustered around other objects, it's really hard to move around if you accidentally click on one of those other ones, right?
Yeah, even when I click the arrows, it still moves the other thing around instead.
So make sure, like, whenever you click on the arrow, which mouse button are you clicking on?
I'm using right click
You're using right click,
because
okay.
I haven't changed settings yet.
Oh, okay, gotcha. Make sure that that's actually working well for you, like to move the object. Sometimes, again, it doesn't work. That can make it more difficult to operate structures and moving things around in Blender for transformations.
I guess I'll just.
All right. But this helps you to kind of see your model in its more straight, kind of active shape and form without distortion operating on top of it. You can still rotate your camera and the other viewports to move it around, again, to get a different angle on your object. But that's how we can switch our camera from being perspective distorted to orthographic non-distortion, which is what I'll recommend you use. We're not going to really play with any of the other camera settings at this time. I will talk in the next exercise about how to change the shape of your camera's viewing area and the quality of it so that you get nice still image renders out of Blender. But that's the basics of how you can manipulate your camera in the scene. And again, what it sees through the lens of the camera is what you can render out of Blender. All right, we'll go ahead and stop the video here for working with your 3D camera. And after this, we're going to move into working with color and texture.